Two royal families, one throne. The Lancasters had held it for 50 years. King of England? No one questioning them. Then a cousin spoke up. Richard, Duke of York, said, "The throne is mine by right." His bloodline was actually stronger. And that argument, that simple, poisonous argument, started 30 years of war. The red rose belonged to Lancaster, the white to York. Hold on to that. It's nearly the only uncomplicated thing in all that follows. The colors came later, by the Tudors who needed a symbol for 30 years of something messy. It was a family feud. 20 moments, 3 dynasties, an island running out of kings. The king didn't die. That was the problem. A dead king produces a succession. A king who sits silent in his chair, unresponsive to his wife, to his newborn son, to the crown placed in his hands, produces something far more dangerous. A vacuum with a heartbeat. Richard, Duke of York, had been waiting for an opening. He didn't create this one. History handed it to him, and he was careful enough to take it with both hands. The first battle lasted less than an hour. The streets of St. Albans were narrow, the kind of place where a battle becomes something closer to a murder. Edmund Beaufort, the king's most powerful supporter, was cornered and killed. What made this moment irreversible wasn't the death, it was who ordered it. York didn't just win a skirmish, he crossed a line England had not crossed in 2 centuries. Noble blood, shed by noble hands, in daylight. York had tried twice to reach the crown through force, and twice pulled back. This time, he went to Parliament. The logic seemed elegant. Henry keeps the title. York inherits after him. Clean. Constitutional. Bloodless. But the Act of Accord had one catastrophic flaw. It disinherited a 7-year-old boy. And that boy had a mother, Margaret of Anjou, who had never once in her life accepted a compromise. York had bought himself a legal argument. He had made himself a permanent enemy. The Lancastrian defenses at Northampton were designed to hold. Guns, earthworks, a flooded meadow. They failed in 20 minutes because Lord Grey of Ruthin, commanding the forward division, simply stepped aside and let the Yorkists through. Treachery on the battlefield is nothing new in this war or any war. What made Northampton different was the prize at the end of it. Henry VI himself, sitting in his tent while the battle happened around him, apparently indifferent to the outcome. Richard, Duke of York, had the castle. He had food, walls, and time. He had no reason to come out. The reasons he did are still debated. A taunt, a feint, a miscalculation. He died in the field. His son was killed on the bridge. And then someone placed a paper crown on York's severed head and hung it above the city gates. A brutal message. But York's oldest surviving son was 19 years old and furious. His name was Edward. Edward of York was 19 years old. Before the battle, he gave one order: no quarter. The snowstorm blew into Lancastrian faces. The Yorkist arrows carried further than the Lancastrians could answer. What followed was not a battle in any chivalric sense. The river ran red for days. 28,000 men died in a single afternoon, the bloodiest battle ever fought on English soil. When it was over, Edward marched to London and took the crown. York had lost the father. England got the son. Edward IV was king. The marriage was already done when Warwick found out. Edward had conducted the entire courtship in secret. A private ceremony, a handful of witnesses, no counsel, no diplomacy. Warwick had been negotiating a French bride for months on Edward's behalf. He had staked his reputation on it. Edward didn't just marry the wrong woman. He told his most powerful supporter that his opinion was irrelevant. Warwick did not forget this. Warwick had put Edward IV on the throne. He had organized the armies, the money, the political alliances. He believed this gave him the right to govern through the king. Edward disagreed. By 1470, Warwick had been pushed aside twice. So he did something no medieval nobleman had successfully done before. He switched sides entirely. He allied with Margaret of Anjou, the woman he had spent a decade fighting, invaded England with a French fleet, and put Henry VI back on the throne. It worked, for 6 months. Warwick chose a battlefield in fog. What he didn't account for was that the fog would disorient his own men. The Earl of Oxford's troops, returning from a successful attack, were mistaken for Yorkists and fired upon by Warwick's own center. The cry of treason went up. Men who would have died for Warwick began to run. The kingmaker died on foot, in the mist, without his horse. The man who had made and unmade kings couldn't survive a case of mistaken identity. Margaret of Anjou had fought for her son's throne for 16 years. She had crossed the Channel 12 times. At Tewkesbury, her army was broken in an afternoon. Her son, the 17-year-old Prince of Wales, the last Lancastrian heir, was killed in the rout. The direct male line of Lancaster was finished. Margaret was captured. She had nothing left to fight for. The Red Rose had run out of kings. Henry VI had been king, prisoner, pawn, and saint, but never a danger to anyone. His crime was weakness. His punishment was 50 years. He was found dead in the Tower on the 21st of May, 1471. Officially, pure displeasure and melancholy. In practice, Edward IV needed him gone, and he was gone. The last Lancaster king left no body of evidence and no body worth claiming. Edward IV was 40 years old. He had survived 2 depositions, a dozen battles, and 20 years on the throne. He died in bed. The cause is still debated. Fever, excess, bad luck. What matters is what he left behind. A 12-year-old heir, a council at war with itself, and a brother named Richard, who had been loyal for 20 years. Loyalty is a calculation. The calculator had just changed his circumstances. Richard moved fast. The young king's escort was intercepted on the road to London. The senior Woodvilles were arrested. The roads were controlled. The council was informed afterward. Edward V entered the Tower in May, for his protection, Richard said, and for coronation preparations. His younger brother joined him in June. The Tower was the safest place in England, Richard explained. It was certainly the most permanent. The legal argument was simple. Edward IV's marriage had been invalid. If the marriage was invalid, the children were illegitimate. If the children were illegitimate, the throne was empty. Parliament accepted it, because Richard already controlled the army, the Tower, and the 2 boys inside it. He was crowned on the 6th of July, 1483. He had 26 months remaining. Through the summer of 1483, the 2 boys were seen less and less. Servants reported their appearances at Tower windows growing rarer. By autumn, no one reported seeing them at all. Richard never announced their deaths. He never produced them alive. He never explained their absence. In the silence, England drew its own conclusions. The boys had been put in the Tower for their protection. Whatever had protected them had stopped working. They were never seen again. A king rules through fear, through loyalty, or through consent. Richard had lost all 3. The nobles who might have supported him were dead, exiled, or watching from a distance. The people who had accepted his coronation now believed he had murdered 2 children. In 1484, his only son died. His queen died the following year. Richard III was King of England, with no heir, no allies he could trust, and no story that held together anymore. Across the Channel, Henry Tudor was watching. Henry Tudor was 28 years old and had spent more than half his life in exile. His claim to the throne was thin. He was Lancaster's last blood, but barely. What he had was France behind him, Wales ahead of him, and a kingdom that had run out of reasons to support its king. He landed at Mill Bay on a Tuesday in August with 2,000 men. Bosworth was 2 weeks later. Thomas Stanley had married Henry Tudor's mother. His brother William commanded 3,000 men on the edge of the battlefield. Together, they arrived at Bosworth without declaring for either side, a calculation so obvious that Richard held Stanley's son hostage against it. When Richard charged directly at Henry's position, a cavalry charge designed to end the battle in one move, the Stanleys decided. The most important battle of the century was settled by men who waited to see which way the wind blew and then made the wind. Richard rode into the charge knowing what it meant. Perhaps he calculated that killing Henry personally was the only remaining move. Perhaps he was simply tired of calculating. He came close. His household knights died around him. He fought on foot at the end. The last English king to die in battle. His crown came off somewhere in the field. His body was found the morning after, stripped and paraded through Leicester. Nobody had come to claim him. Henry delayed the wedding deliberately until after his coronation, so that no one could argue Elizabeth's bloodline had given him the throne. He had won England at Bosworth. He wanted that understood. On the 18th of January, 1486, Henry VII married Elizabeth of York at Westminster. Red rose, white rose. One crown. The Tudor emblem merged both into a single flower. It was a piece of propaganda so elegant it became, in time, the truth. The Wars of the Roses ended not with a treaty, but with a wedding. Two families had spent 30 years destroying each other over a throne that neither could hold securely. The Tudors took what was left, Lancaster's claim, York's blood, England's exhaustion, and built something new from all three. Then they spent the next 100 years pretending it had always existed. 30 years, 20 moments, the longest family argument in English history. One island that had finally run out of men willing to fight for either rose.